Okay, good evening everyone. Good evening everyone. Today I'll be discussing about the nervous system. Okay, so the nervous system is by far the most complex system in the body because it is formed by a network of many billion nerve cells and glial cells. So, by anatomy, there are two major divisions of the nervous system. We have the central nervous system, which consists basically of the brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system, which consists of peripheral nerves and ganglia. Okay, peripheral nerves such as your cranial and the spinal nerves. And as I have said, it is a network of many billion nerve cells and glial cells, and that includes the neurons and the glial cells. The neurons or the nerve cells, and glial cells or the supporting cells. Okay? Sorry. Neurons respond to environmental changes or stimuli by altering the ionic gradient electrical potential that exists across the plasma membranes. So remember that the network or yung communication ng neurons to other neurons or other target cells is via electrochemical process or electrochemical stimulus. Okay? Okay, so all cells maintain such a gradient, also called as electrical potential. Okay, but cells that can rapidly change this potential in response to stimuli are said to be excitable or irritable. So ito yung mga example of target cells or cells of the body that are excitable or irritable. Ibig sabihin, once na stimulate sila, it will again fire back the impulses or the nerve impulses, magde-depolarize o magpapasok agad yung sodium ion within the cell. So magde-depolarize and then eventually magre-repolarization or hyperpolarization. So later I'm going to show you the nerve action potential. Okay? So neurons react promptly to stimuli with a reversal of the ionic gradient. Yun yung sinasabi natin kasi normally the resting membrane potential of a nerve cell, okay, is negatively charged around negative 70 millivolts, okay? That generally spreads from place that receive the stimulus and is propagated across the neuron's entire plasma membrane. So, yun yung ano natin, yung initial stimuli natin is the reversal of ionic gradient. So magde-depolarize, ibig sabihin from the resting membrane of around negative 70, okay, or negative yung charge niya, it will become, so mag-reverse, magiging positive because there is influx of sodium ions. This propagation, called action potential, the depolarization wave or the nerve impulse, is capable of traveling long distances along neuronal processes and thereby transmitting such signals to other target cells. It can be neurons, muscles, or glands. Okay, so we go to the development of the nervous system. So remember that the nervous system develops during the third week of embryonic development. So it develops from the ectoderm. So remember that because the muscle tissue is derived from the mesoderm. Okay, so the nervous system is from the ectoderm. Okay, so with signals from the underlying axial structure, the notochord ectoderm on the mid-dorsal side of the embryo thickens to form the epithelial neural plate. Later, I'm going to show you the picture, no? And then eventually, the lateral sides of the plate fold upward, bend, and grow toward each other medially, and within a few days, will fuse to form the neural tube. Okay? Itong tandaan natin yung neural crest kasi it will separate from the neuroepithelium and becomes the mesenchymal. Okay? Be very particular with the structures of the nervous system, yung kung saan sila nanggaling. So neural crest cells, it will yield to this kind of cells. Later I'm going to show you a table. Okay? Neural crest cells migrate extensively and differentiate as all the cells of the PNS as well as the number of the non-neuronal cell types. Yung neural tube naman natin, ito yung main source niya is basically yung brain, no? Or the central nervous system. Okay, so ito yung neurulation in the embryo. Okay? So, initially, meron tayong neural plate, no? Okay? Neural folds and the neural groove form the neural plate. So, itong sila. Okay? Now, during the third week of development, okay, the neural folds elevate. Ito yung folds natin. So, tataas sila, elevate, and approach one another. And eventually, pag nag-approach sila one another, ito yung groove natin, parang invagination. Further development will yield or magta-touch na itong neural folds natin. And then eventually, the neural folds will come together. Okay, magiging ano na siya. Ito na yung magiging neural tube natin. Okay? And then syempre sa neural fold, itong parang anong color ito? Parang lilac ba ito or light na purple, okay? These are your neural crest, okay? Neural crest is just at the folds, no? So when the neural folds come together, they become the neural tube while your neural crest separate from the epithelium, from the neuroepithelium. Okay? So it will form the PNS and non-neuronal types or cells of the body. Okay? So we go to neurons. Neurons is the functional unit of both the CNS and the PNS, central nervous system and peripheral nervous system, neurons or nerve cells. So most neurons consist of three main parts. So remember this one. We have the cell body or perikaryon, the dendrites, and the axon. So ito yung cell body or perikaryon, yung branches niyan or yung arborization nito around the cell body are known as the dendrites, and then itong long process na to is the axon. Okay? The cell body contains the nucleus and most of the cell's organelles. Okay? And serve as the synthetic or trophic center of the entire neuron. The dendrites, itong mga elongated processes extending from the perikaryon, are specialized to receive stimuli from other neurons at unique sites called synapses. Later, we're going to discuss about synapses. And then this long single process ending at synapses specialized to generate conduct nerve impulses to other cells is known as the axon. Okay? They may receive information from other neurons, information that mainly modifies transmission of action of potentials to those neurons. So later, meron tayong classification of axons or yung classifications of yung interconnection ng mga parts of the neurons according to kung saan sila nagko-connect. Okay? Okay, so neurons can be classified according to the number of processes extending from the perikaryon. So it can be multipolar neurons. Ibig sabihin, one axon and two or more dendrites. So this one is a multipolar neuron. Okay, isang axon lang and madaming dendrites. Next is your bipolar neurons, in which there is only one dendrite and one axon. Okay? Bipolar. How about the unipolar or pseudo-unipolar neurons? This, meron lang siyang single process that bifurcates close to the perikaryon. So, nagba-bifurcate siya. Isang process lang siya. Pero nag-bifurcate siya into two. Okay? Basically, unipolar siya. Or pseudo-unipolar neurons. While your anaxonic neurons, syempre anaxonic, madami siyang dendrites pero wala siyang true axon. Kaya without axon neurons, no? Anaxonic neurons. They do not produce action potentials but they regulate electrical changes of the adjacent neurons. Okay. Neurons can also be classified functionally. So it can be sensory neurons. Okay, these are afferent and they receive stimuli from receptors throughout the body. So sila nagre-receive ng stimuli depende kung ano yung receptors. Okay, whether pain receptor, okay, thermoreceptor, okay, or yun, pain or nociceptor, thermoreceptor, baroreceptor, basta lahat ng mga sensory stimulus they receive. Okay, those are sensory neurons or afferent neurons. Okay, while your motor neurons, these are efferent neurons. They send impulses to effector organs such as muscle fibers and glands. So sila yung nagkukos ng nagsisend ng impulse to the effector organs, whether the organs such as yung muscle fibers pwede siyang mag-contract, okay, or yung glands pwede mag-secrete. Contraction pa din ng myoepithelial cells to secrete glands, okay? And neurons can also be somatic or motor nerves. These are under voluntary control and typically innervate most skeletal muscle. So remember itong mga neuromuscular junction natin, no? These are somatic motor nerves na nagko-control ng skeletal muscle. While your autonomic motor nerves control the involuntary activities of glands, cardiac muscle, and most smooth muscle. So guys, sa muscle natin, we have skeletal, cardiac, and the smooth muscle. So basically, yung autonomic natin, okay, these are the nerves, autonomic motor nerves, ila ang nagko-control the involuntary activities of the cardiac muscle of the heart and most of the smooth muscle. Interneurons establish relationships among the neurons, forming complex functional networks or circuits as in the CNS and retina. Okay, they are generally multipolar or anaxonic and are estimated to include about almost 100% of the neurons in the human body. Okay? Remember that in the CNS, most neuronal pericardia or cell body occur in the gray matter with axons concentrated in the white matter. Okay, so cell body or pericardion. So this is the cell body. This is the neuronal region that contains the nucleus and surrounding cytoplasm exclusive of the cell processes. So ito lang siya. Okay? Anong function na? It acts as a trophic center producing cytoplasm for movement into the processes. And remember this one, okay? They have the nasal bodies. These are concentrated RER and other polysomes and appear as clumps of basophilic material. Okay? Nasal substances or chromatophilic substances or nasal bodies. Intermediate filaments are abundant both in pericardia, and the processes in this cell are often called neurofilaments. Okay? So remember that one. The intermediate filament present in your cell body or pericardion are known as the neurofilaments. Okay, dendrites. Okay, dendrites are short and divided like 3 branches. Okay? And they are usually covered with many synapses and are the principal signal reception and processing sites on neurons. And remember, so very complex yung arborization ng dendrites nyo. Ibig sabihin yung branching niya makes it possible for one neuron to receive and integrate a great number of axon terminals from the other nerve cells. So pwede siya mag-connect to several connection from other neurons. While your axon, as I have said earlier, ito yung long processes, no? Fine cylindrical long process that varies in length and diameter according to the type of neuron. Remember that most neurons have only one axon. And remember that they originate from the, So they originate from this one, no? The axon hillock or the pyramid-shaped region of the pericardion. So dyan siya nag-originate. And remember, mayroon tayong term gaya ng sa muscle, mayroong sarcolemma. So the plasma membrane of axon is often called as axolemma and its contents are known as axoplasm. So parang sa muscle din, sarcoplasm, sarcolemma, okay? So okay, the distal end of one axon forms the terminal arborization, and axons of interneurons and some motor neurons have branches called collaterals. So same as your vessels, din may mga collateral circulation. So same lang din dito because it is a complex network of arborizing fine processes such as your dendrites and axons, no? So they influence the activity of many other neurons. Okay, remember that the direction of the nerve impulses is bidirectional. Ibig sabihin, can be pabalik-balik siya or it can be an anterograde or retrograde transport. When we say anterograde transport, that means that organelles and macromolecules synthesized in the cell body move along the axon from the pericardium to the synaptic terminal. So anterograde from galing siya sa pericardium or the cell body going to the synaptic terminals. Okay? While your retrograde transport, macromolecules move from the periphery to the cell body. So from periphery to cell body, while your anterograde from body to the periphery. Okay? So remember also that this kind of transport, ito yung mga ginagamit or mechanism ng mga ano natin, 'di ba? Parang retrograde, anterograde transmission ng mga microorganisms natin affecting the CNS or yung mga viruses natin, right? And axonal transport in both directions uses the following proteins, motor proteins. We have the kinesin and the dynein. Okay, kinesin, anterograde, vesicular transport, and while your dynein, ATPase mediates retrograde transport. Okay, so remember that one: kinesin, anterograde, dynein, retrograde transport. Okay, so nerve impulses, as I mentioned earlier, it is an electrochemical process initiated at the axon hillock. Ito yung pyramid-shaped, the region of the pericardium or your cell body. When other impulses received at the cell body or dendrites meet at a certain threshold. So remember, merong tayong resting membrane potential. So hindi pa yan magfa-fire, okay? Hindi pa yan magfa-fire. Once na na-receive na or yung impulses are received at cell body, na ano niya yung threshold na para mag-fire siya or para mag-depolarize, then the impulses can be propagated na along the neurons, okay? So the action potential is propagated along the axon as a wave of membrane depolarization produced by voltage-gated sodium and potassium channel. So pag nag-open yung sodium, so magre-reverse ang iyong ionic gradient from negative to more positive. So that's the membrane depolarization that allow diffusion of these ions into and out of the axoplasm. So the extracellular compartment around all regions of the neuron is a very thin zone immediately outside the cell that is formed by enclosing glial cells that regulate its ionic content. So very thin lang siya. Kaya very regulated itong mga ano natin, itong mga voltage gated sodium and potassium channels. So remember sa mga conditions such as yung mga seizures, yon ganon, hindi siya or hindi controlled ang pag-fire ng mga neurons mo. Okay. So synapses, what are synapses? Synapses are sites where nerve impulses are transmitted from one neuron to another or from neurons and other effector cells. So remember that nerve impulses can be neuron to neurons or neuron to other target cells such as your muscles and glands. Okay? And usually unidirectional dito sa synapses kasi it's just from the nerve impulses from one neuron or for example dito sa axon terminal na to papunta sa another postsynaptic neuron. So isang direction lang. Hindi siya pwedeng from postsynaptic pabalik sa presynaptic. Okay? However, yung axonal transport natin, dalawa yon, can be anterograde and retrograde transport. And remember that most synapses convert an electrical signal nerve impulses from the presynaptic cell, so this one, this axon terminal here, into a chemical signal that affects the postsynaptic cell or postsynaptic neuron. So most synapses act by releasing neurotransmitters, which are usually small molecules that bind to specific receptor proteins in the postsynaptic neurons, okay, to either open or close ion channels or initiate second messenger cascade. So yung mga cyclic AMP natin, etc. And yun mga pag-open or close na mga ion channels natin, okay? And remember that there are three parts or three components of your synapse. Okay, we have the presynaptic axon terminal, the terminal button. The next is the synaptic cleft. Ito yung in between the presynaptic axon terminal and the postsynaptic cell membrane or postsynaptic neuron. So tatlong parts 'yon, okay? So again, neurotransmitters from excitatory synapses cause postsynaptic sodium channels to open, and the resulting influx of this ion initiates a depolarization wave in that neuron or effector cell as described previously. So as I have mentioned, yung voltage-gated sodium and potassium channels, sila yung nagre-regulate ng influx of ions across the axoplasm. Okay, at inhibitory synapses, neurotransmitters open chloride or other anion channels. So remember this one, no? Pag excitatory, usually sodium channels or cation. Okay? Pag inhibitory, anion, chloride or other anion channels. And causing influx of anions and hyperpolarization. So remember, during depolarization, remember that pagpasok ng mga sodium ions or positive charged ions such as your sodium, so magiging positive yung membrane potential, no? And then eventually, ma-inhibit siya pag open naman ng chloride channels, mag-cause naman ng influx of anion balik. So babalik siya into the negatively charged membrane potential. So that is the hyperpolarization of postsynaptic cell. Okay, so morphologically, various types of synapses are seen between neurons. Can be axosomatic, in which the axon is connected to your cell body. Yung synapses across the axon and the pericardium or cell body. We also have axodendritic. So from the term, remember somatic is body yan ha. So kaya axosomatic. Axodendritic synapse naman from axon to dendrite. Okay, by way of a dendritic spine. Also axonic synapse. So between axon. So synapses between the axons. Okay, neurotransmitters. Remember that nerve impulses is an electrochemical process. Electrical signal muna and then turned into a chemical signal. Okay? Neurotransmitters are chemical substances or messengers that transmit signals from neuron across the synapse to a target cell. It can be another neuron, a muscle, or a gland. And there are various neurotransmitters present in the body. But remember this one, no? Acetylcholine is the neurotransmitters present at the neuromuscular junction. So, sa muscle tissue natin, nandoon yung acetylcholine. Remember this one, ha? And also catecholamines, such as epinephrine or epinephrine and dopamine. We also have amino acids, such as glutamate. This is the most common neurotransmitter in the brain. Glycine, serotonin, GABA. Remember GABA or gamma aminobutyrate. This is the primary inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain. So remember this one ha. Yung mga neurotransmitters natin, lalabas ito sa exam or sa quiz natin. Okay? Amino acids, such as glutamate, this is the most common neurotransmitter, while the most or the primary inhibitor neurotransmitter in the brain is your GABA. So remember that one. You also have small peptides such as endorphins and substance P. Okay. Now we go to glial cells and neuronal activity. Okay, so tapos na tayo sa neurons. We go now to your glial cells and neuronal activity. Glial cells, these are supporting structure or supporting cells of the nervous system. So they support neuronal survival and activities and are 10 times more abundant in the mammalian brain than the neurons. So mas madami yung supporting cells rather than the neurons. Okay? They develop from progenitor cells of the embryonic neural plate. Okay? Remember that in the CNS, the glial cells surround both the neuronal cell bodies, which are often larger than glial cells, and the processes of axons and dendrites occupying the space between the neurons. Kumbaga, kung sa connective tissue, no? Sila yung ECM, sila yung extracellular matrix, sila glial cells, okay? So the fibrous intercellular network surrounding the cells of the CNS, a network of cellular processes termed as neuropil, emerging from neurons and glial cells. So example of our glial cells in the nervous system, we have oligodendrocyte, schwann cell or neurolemocyte, astrocytes, satellite cells of ganglia, ependymal cells, and microglia. Okay. So, oligodendrocytes. Okay. So, oligodendrocytes, remember the function of oligodendrocytes kasi in the central nervous system, oligodendrocytes produce the myelin sheaths around axons that provide the electrical insulation for neurons in the central nervous system. Kasi meron din tayong counterpart nito sa peripheral nervous system, which is your Schwann cells, okay? These are the predominant glial cells in the CNS white matter. White siya kasi high lipid content or lipid concentrated and wrapped around membrane sheets. Remember that yung mga ano natin, yung mga drugs natin na para sa brain, no? Kailangan it should be soluble sa lipid so that it can be absorbed. Okay? So they appear as small cells with rounded condensed nuclei and unstained cytoplasm. They appear as fried egg appearance. So ito, okay, this is the neuron, neuropil, yung mga fibers, mga eosinophilic fine processes yan. Okay. These are your glial cells, no? Oligodendrocytes. Okay. So small cells with rounded condensed nuclei and unstained cytoplasm. So they appear as fried egg appearance. Okay? Kaya pag may mga conditions such as your oligodendroglioma or tumor, brain tumor na kung saan there is proliferation of oligodendrocytes, so ang tinitingnan natin ay fried egg appearance ng mga neoplastic cells. Okay, next is the astrocytes. So astro, star, okay? They have large number of radiating processes and are unique to the CNS. So, remember this one. So, yung mga fine processes niya looks like stellate or star in appearance, no? Remember that they are the most numerous glial cells of the CNS as well as the most diverse structurally and functionally. So, we have two types. We have fibrous astrocytes and protoplasmic astrocytes. So, fibrous astrocytes have relatively few but long processes, while your protoplasmic processes or astrocytes pala, ito yung may mga shorter or branched processes. Remember that terminal branching of astrocytic processes is very extensive, okay, allowing single astrocyte to associate with over 1 million of synaptic sites. And remember that GFAP, no? Glial fibrillary acid protein. This is an intermediate filament that reinforces the astrocytic processes. So this is a unique marker for astrocytes. So ito yung ginagamit natin kung sakali meron tayong mga tumors. Remember that tumors arising from the astrocytes, ito yung most common source of brain tumors. Yung mga astrocytoma. So madami yan, WHO grade 1 to 4. So yun yung pinaka-common source ng brain tumors natin, yung astrocytes. And nagpapatest tayo ng, for example, in immunohistochemistry, we order glial fibrillary acid protein or GFAP to signify that it is indeed from the astrocytic origin. Okay? So that we can diagnose if this is astrocytoma, ano ba to? Pilocytic astrocytoma, okay? Or glioblastoma, for example. So remember that astrocytes have a large number of radiating processes and are unique to the CNS and have different functions, all of these ones. So they regulate the extracellular ionic concentration around neurons with particular importance in buffering extracellular potassium levels. They guide and physically support movements and locations of differentiating neurons in the developing CNS. So sila nag-guide, kumbaga sila yung mga nurse na ilagay natin itong neurons na to dito sa area na to. Okay? And they support, no, the movements and locations of, kasi nagba-migrate yan during development, 'di ba? Remember dun yung folds magtapikay sila para maging neural tube. They regulate vasodilation within the CNS and moving nutrients. They extend processes with expanded perivascular feet that cover capillary endothelial cells and contribute to the blood-brain barrier. So they extend processes that associate with or cover synapses in the CNS, affecting the formation, function, and plasticity of these structures, and they form barrier layer of expanded processes called the glial limiting membrane, lining the meninges at the external CNS surface. Okay, kaya when you have a tumor arising from astrocytes, medyo lalo na yung mga high grade ng mga astrocytoma, medyo ano siya, deadly actually siya. Okay? Okay, next is your ependymal cells. Ano yung ependymal cells? So, as you can see in the picture, these are columnar or cuboidal. So, remember, meron din siyang mga cilia, no? As you can see, no? So, these are columnar or cuboidal cells that line the ventricles of the brain and the central canal of the spinal cord. Yung ventricles ng brain, empty yon, but it is, cavity siya, but filled with the CSF. So, itong ventricles natin. In some CNS locations, the apical ends of the ependymal cells have cilia. So, such as this one, no? Meron siyang cilia. Anong function ng cilia sa ependymal cells? Okay, they facilitate the movement of CSF and long microvilli which are likely involved in absorption then. Okay? So remember that ependymal cells are joined apically by junctional complexes similar to those of epithelial cells. However, unlike the true epithelium, okay, wala siyang basal lamina. So supposedly dito yung basal lamina, 'di ba? Okay? Pero ito wala. Immediately adjacent to neuropil agad. So tingnan mo, meron siyang cuboidal cells pero wala siyang basement membrane or basal lamina. Neuropil na agad. Okay? So next is microglia. Okay, microglia, these are small cells with short, irregular processes evenly distributed throughout the gray and white matter. So remember that microglia migrate through the neuropil, scanning the tissue for damaged cells and invading organisms. So basically, microglia, these are the phagocytes in the CNS. Okay? So since they are the phagocytes of the CNS, hindi sila derived from the neural progenitor cells like other glial cells, but they are derived from the circulating monocytes kasi they are part of the MPS, the monocyte phagocytic system. Okay? And they function as macrophages and other antigen presenting cells. Okay? So next we have the Schwann cells. So Schwann cells, as I have mentioned earlier, ito yung galing sa neural crest natin. So they are found only in the peripheral nervous system. And anong ginagawa nila? They have trophic interaction with axons and importantly allow for their myelination like the oligodendrocytes of the CNS. So as I mentioned earlier, yung oligodendrocytes sila yung nagpo-produce ng myelin sheath. Okay? Myelination of the neurons in the central nervous system. Oligodendrocytes yung source ng myelin. Okay? While in the peripheral nervous system, it is the Schwann cells. Okay? So ito yung Schwann cells, no? So itong white structure here is the myelin sheath. So this one is the neurons, okay? The satellite cells, yung mga yan. Okay. Yan pala yun. Satellite cells of the ganglia. Also derived from the embryonic neural crest. Small satellite cells form an intimate covering layer over large neuronal cell. So, malalaman mong neuron yan, okay, meron siyang conspicuous nucleolus, no? And a fine nuclear detail, okay? The satellite cells exert trophic and supportive effect on these neurons, insulating, nourishing, and regulating microenvironments. So, ito yung mga satellite cells natin of the ganglia. So, here's a cartoon, a drawing of your CNS glial cells. Remember, central nervous system glial cells. So, present lang ito sa central nervous system, no? So, we have oligodendrocyte and they produce the myelin sheath. Okay? Next is your astrocytes. These are the most common, okay, glial cells and the most common source of brain tumor. So, astrocytes. Next is your ependymal cells. Again, cuboidal columnar cells. Some of them can be ciliated to allow the movement of CSF. And then wala silang basement membrane directly adjacent to the neuropil ependymal cells. They line the ventricles, okay? Ventricles and spinal cord. And then your microglial cells, these are phagocytes of the CNS. Okay, microglial cell. So CNS glial cells or CNS supporting cells. While your PNS glial cells, the peripheral nervous system, we have the Schwann cells. This is the counterpart of oligodendrocyte in the central nervous system, and they produce the axon. They produce the myelin sheath. Okay. And then your satellite cells. Okay, satellite cells. Okay, ito yung mga satellite cells natin. Kanina we have discussed them that they provide nourishment, okay, in the microenvironment of the neurons. So ito yung origin natin, no? So remember guys that the neural tube, pag nakita mo yung neural tube, ito sila talaga yung main source ng central nervous system. Okay. Okay, sa CNS, lahat ng CNS, neural tube. So oligodendrocyte, yun, check on this this table. Okay, myelin production, electrical insulation. While your peripheral nervous system and then your ganglia or non-neuronal structures are derived from the neural crest. Okay, Schwann cell from the neural crest, location peripheral nerves, and remember, same sila ng functions kasi nga yung myelin yun. Myelin production and electrical insulation. So mas faster saltatory conduction with myelinated neurons, okay? And then astrocytes, yung structural metabolic support of neurons, BBB, or blood-brain barrier repair processes. Satellite cells, again, structural metabolic support for neuronal cell bodies. Ependymal cells, galing siya sa neural tube kasi it lines the ventricle central canal of CNS and aid in production and movement of CSF. While your microglia, mentioned earlier, the microglia, although part siya ng central nervous system, it is derived from bone marrow cells because it is considered as part of the monocyte phagocytic system and is considered as a phagocyte of the central nervous system, and therefore its functions include defense and immune related activities in the brain. Okay, now we go to central nervous system. Okay, the central nervous system, major regions of this one include the cerebrum, cerebellum, and the spinal cord. And remember, it is covered by 3 connective tissue layers known as the meninges. Although it contains a very little collagen and fibrous tissue throughout its substance, kaya medyo soft siya, relatively soft and easily damaged by injuries affecting its protective cranium or vertebral bones. Remember na sobrang soft siya, prone to damage siya, but again, this is covered by a thick cranial bone. Okay? Medyo makapal yan, more than around 1 mm thick yung cranium natin. Kaya minsan, pag 1 cm pala, pag sinabihan tayo pagpasaway, katig-agad sang ulo mo. Actually, that is true. Be proud, no? Na tigain mo ulo because it protects a delicate tissue. It protects the brain, okay? The entire CNS displays organized areas of white matter and gray matter. Remember that there are differences in the color distribution secondary to the myelin, no? So ito yung gray matter and then yung white matter more on sa deeper layers, no? Okay? So again, this is the histologic section of your cerebrum or the central nervous system. Remember, ito yung neurons and we have the glial supporting cells, mga astrocytes natin, and these are your axons. Remember, yung axon natin ay surrounded by your myelin sheath, but again, during processing, hindi sila na-stain, no? Kaya they appear as colorless around this darker nucleus. Okay, next is your cerebral cortex. So according to neuroscientists, it is divided or it is made up of different layers of neurons, of which the pyramidal neurons yung conspicuous. So this yung layers natin include the following: molecular, external granular, external pyramidal, internal granular, internal pyramidal, and multiform layer. So ito yung mga pyramidal neurons natin in your cerebral cortex. Remember that the cerebral cortex, yung function niya is the integration of sensory information and the initiation of voluntary motor responses. Okay? So next is your cerebellar cortex, cerebellar, ilunggo. Okay, the cerebellar cortex, which coordinates muscle activity throughout the body, also has layered organization. So yung cerebral cortex natin has 6 layers. Ito naman, it has 3 layers. So we have an outer molecular layer, a central layer of very large neurons known as your Purkinje cells. Dendrites extend throughout the molecular layer as a branching basket of nerve fibers and an inner granule or granular layer. This is formed by the very small neurons which are packed together densely. Kaya parang medyo darker yung color niya. Okay? Molecular layer, Purkinje cell layer, and the granule layer. This is the medulla. Remember the function of cerebellar cortex, muscular activity, okay, coordination. Next is your spinal cord. So remember that during cross sections of your spinal cord, the white matter is peripheral and the gray matter is internal. So kabaliktaran siya sa cerebral cortex natin, ha. Kasi sa outer layer yung gray matter and sa inner layer yung white matter. This is different from the spinal cord, okay? And again, yung gray matter natin, parang ano siya, it is shaped like a butterfly or letter H, okay? In the center is an opening. This one is the central canal. So remember, this is lined by your ependymal cells and this is continuous with the ventricles in the brain. Again, ito yung mga cavities natin filled with cerebrospinal fluid. Yon, lined by ependymal cells. So remember that the gray matter forms the anterior horns, also known as the motor neurons, so responsible for the movement, and posterior horns, which is responsible for the sensory fibers or sensory information, no, sila yung tumatanggap kung may ng sensory stimuli, okay? Then the spinal cord neurons are large and multipolar, especially the motor neurons in the anterior horns. So remember, anterior horns is for motor neurons, while your posterior sensory. Okay, remember that one, ha? Okay, so again, yung mga layers of the brain natin is covered by a tough covering known as your meninges. Okay, so remember that the skull and the vertebral column protect the CNS, but between the bone and the nervous tissue are membranes of connective tissue known as the meninges. Okay, and there are 3 meningeal layers distinguished, termed as the dura, arachnoid, and pia maters. So the first layer is the dura mater. This is a very thick and very very tough fibrous tissue, no? Thick external layer consists of dense fibroelastic connective tissue that is continuous with the periosteum of the skull, and this is separated from the arachnoid by thin subdural space. So dura, then there is a space, subdural space, and then arachnoid. Okay, arachnoid has 2 components: a sheet of connective tissue in contact with the dura mater. Okay, yun yung adjacent sa dura mater, just before or just after the subdural space, and a system of loosely arranged trabeculae composed of collagen fibroblasts continues with the underlying pia mater. So 2 components or 2 layers siya. Remember that yung arachnoid, beneath the arachnoid is termed as the subarachnoid space, and this is the one filled with CSF. And in the subarachnoid space, there are structures or sites where the CSF is absorbed in the blood, and this is known as the arachnoid villi. So remember that one, ha. Pag nag-circulate yung CSF along the subarachnoid space sa ventricles, okay, the site of absorption is the arachnoid villi, okay? And remember that the arachnoid is avascular because it lacks nutritive capillaries, but larger vessels run through it and pwedeng mag-diffuse across that. And the last layer or the innermost layer is known as the pia mater. Okay, it consists of flattened cells and separated from the neural elements by the very thin superficial layer, astrocytic process known as the glial limitans or glial limiting membrane, which adheres firmly to the pia mater. So remember the three layers of the meninges. Okay. So again, ito yung picture natin ng meninges natin, ha. Okay, so this is the cerebral cortex, the white matter, the gray matter. So kabaliktaran siya sa central or sa spinal cord, okay? And then this is pia mater, the innermost layer, okay? And then subarachnoid space. Okay, nandito yung ano natin, yung tawag dito, yung CSF nagfo-flow. And this one is the arachnoid, okay? Arachnoid layer. Or remember that sa arachnoid layer nandun yung mga arachnoid villi natin wherein the CSF is reabsorbed. And then subdural space, and then we have the dura mater, periostal layer, and the meningeal layer. Periostal layer is directly in contact with the bone, with the periosteum of the skull, of the cranium. While your meningeal layer, ito yung in contact or in close association with your arachnoid. Okay. Okay, next is the spinal cord and meninges. So ito yung histologic section natin ng spinal cord and meninges. So remember itong meningeal layers natin, no? So we have the arachnoid, we have the dura mater. This is the fibrous tissue directly, or the outermost or the external layer of the meninges. This is a tough fibrous tissue, and beneath that is the subdural space, and after that the second layer is your arachnoid. And then beneath that, the subarachnoid space filled with your CSF. And then the innermost layer is your pia mater. This is closely adherent to your brain substance or your spinal cord. Very thin lang yan kasi yan yung tinatawag na glial limiting membrane or glia limitans. Okay, so this is the dura. Okay, the thick fibrous tissue. Subdural space, we have the arachnoid, subarachnoid space, and then again, avascular siya, but it is traversed by larger blood vessels. And then the pia mater, in contact directly with the brain substance. Okay, next is the blood-brain barrier. So this is a functional barrier that allows much tighter control than that in most tissues over the passage of substance moving from blood into the CNS tissue. So remember that the structural components of the blood-brain barrier includes the capillary endothelium and the limiting layer of perivascular astrocytic feet. Remember, parang ano din siya, parang glomerulus din, no? Kasi, di ba, glomerulus is a tuft of capillaries. So same lang din sa blood-brain barrier. The main component of which is your capillary endothelium, in which the cells are tightly sealed together with well-developed occluding junctions. So remember occluding junctions. This is one of the junctional complexes of the epithelium. Okay, and with little or no transcytosis activity. Remember, very tight siya, di ba? So hindi siya nakakapasok yung any substance or molecules dyan. So no transcytosis can occur. Okay? Kaya, ito yung protective barrier ng brain natin, no? So, it protects the neurons and glia from bacterial toxins, infectious agents, and other exogenous substances, and helps maintain the stable composition and constant balance of ions in the interstitial fluid that is required for normal neuronal function. Remember na iba yung concentration ng mga substrates from the blood and in the CSF. Okay, just like sa glucose, iba yung concentration niya from blood kasi parang ultrafiltrate plasma lang din siya. Okay, next is your choroid plexus. So kanina we have learned that arachnoid villi is responsible for the resorption, okay, of your CSF. Okay, it is found in the subarachnoid space, okay? The choroid plexus on the other end consists of highly specialized tissue with elaborate folds and many villi projecting into the four large ventricles of the brain. Remember that the ventricles of the brain, these are cavities filled with CSF. Okay? It is found in the roofs of the third and fourth ventricles and is part of the two lateral ventricular walls. Okay? And again, lahat ng cavities natin sa brain is lined by your ependymal cells. Okay? So ito yung mga cuboidal to columnar, some of which are ciliated. Ang pinagkaiba nila, parang similar siya sa epithelium pero wala siyang basal membrane. So they lie directly sa brain substance, or they lie directly sa neuropil. Okay? And then the function of choroid plexus is to remove water from blood and release it as CSF. So in essence, si choroid plexus siya nagpo-produce ng CSF. Okay? What is CSF? CSF is cerebrospinal fluid. It is a clear and colorless fluid that contains ions but very little protein kasi nga ultrafiltrate of plasma. And its only cells are normally very sparse lymphocytes. Okay? So kaya in certain conditions affecting the brain, so merong variation in the composition of the leukocytes in the brain. So pwedeng tumaas yung lymphocytes, the normal, in which there is increase in the normal cells, or the normal cells in the CSF mag-increase, so that is termed as pleocytosis. And produced continuously and is completely fills the ventricles, the central canal of the spinal cord, and subarachnoid and perivascular spaces. So, yun, as I have mentioned, arachnoid villi, siya yung responsible for the absorption of CSF back to the venous circulation. So, choroid plexus produces the CSF while your arachnoid villi absorbs or reabsorbs CSF back into the circulation. Okay, so ito yung ventricles natin. This is the choroid plexus. So, present siya sa ventricles, no? So, ito yung parang mga papillary folds. So, meron siyang elaborate folds. Okay, this is your CSF. We have yung ependymal cells. And we also have our capillary. Okay. Now we go to the peripheral nervous system. So again, peripheral nervous system, yung ano nito, yung origin nito is from neural crest, right? And it involves cranial nerves, spinal nerves, and ganglia. Okay? And nerve endings. So remember that nerves are bundles of nerve fibers or axons surrounded by schwann cells and layers of connective tissues. In peripheral nerve fibers, axons are sheathed by schwann cells or neurolemocytes. So this is the counterpart of your oligodendrocytes in the CNS. Okay? The sheath may be myelinated or may be non-myelinated or not myelinated or unmyelinated fiber depending on their diameter. Okay? So ito yung pinagkaiba ng myelinated fibers versus unmyelinated fibers. So, usually pag myelinated fibers, axons are larger in diameter. Okay? While your unmyelinated fibers, these are smaller in diameter. Okay? And axons surrounded by concentric layers of schwann cell plasma membrane. Okay? Makikita mo dito sa pictures natin, no? So, ano siya, concentric layers of schwann cell plasma membrane, parang onion skin around the axon, while your unmyelinated fibers, meron pa din schwann cells pero just the cytoplasm of schwann cells lang. So hindi siya nagpulupot or hindi siya nagbulumbid ba sa sa axon. So remember that myelinated fibers, meron tayong saltatory conduction. So, mas mabilis yung action potential kasi nagde-jump lang siya from one nodes of Ranvier to the other. Okay? So, yun yung nodes of Ranvier present. So, parang may mga nodes siya para mas mabilis yung conduction. This is termed as the saltatory conduction. While your unmyelinated axon, siyempre maliliit siya. slow ang pag-spread ng action potential kasi wala kang jumping stones, okay? Parang wala kang nodes of runway in which the action potential can jump from one node to the other. Okay, myelination of large diameter peripheral nerve axons. So remember that myelinated axons are usually larger in size. Okay? So ito, paano nagmamyelinate ang axon natin? So first, ito yung axon, ito yung schwann cells. Remember, schwann cells sa peripheral nervous system yan ha. So, direction of wrapping, magra-wrap ngayon ng cytoplasm ang nucleus irarap ng cytoplasm ng schwann cell ang axon. Okay? The schwann cell, cytoplasm, plasma membrane begin to form consecutive layers around the axon. So, magra-wrap lang siya ng repeatedly until mag-overlap yung inner layers of the schwann cell plasma membrane to form the myelin sheath. Okay? And then eventually the schwann cell cytoplasm are pushed to the periphery of the cell as the myelin sheath is formed. So again, the schwann cells remain still at the periphery of the axon. So that's how the myelin sheath. So several layers of myelin sheath are actually the cytoplasm of your schwann cells. While your unmyelinated fibers naman, similar lang din siya pero hindi siya concentric circle. Part lang ng cytoplasm ang nagko-coat sa axon mo. So remember the table, lalabas yan sa exam. So nerve organization, immediately around the external laminae of the schwann cells is a thin layer called endoneurium consisting of reticular fibers, scattered fibroblasts, and capillaries. So remember, just like in the muscle, no? Meron tayong organization of muscles, of skeletal muscle. So endoneurium, endomysium. Now, groups of axons of schwann cells and endoneurium are bundled together as fascicles. So just like skeletal muscle, so may muscle fascicles din siya. And this is surrounded by a sleeve of perineurium containing flat fibrocytes with their edges sealed together by tight junctions. And then externally, the peripheral nerves have a dense, irregular fibrous coat termed as the epineurium. So, endoneurium, perineurium, epineurium. Okay? Peripheral nerves establish communication between centers in the CNS and the sense organs and effectors such as your muscles, glands, or other neurons actually contain both afferent and efferent fibers. So, afferent fibers carry information from internal body regions and the environment to the CNS. So from the periphery back to the CNS, while your efferent fibers carry impulses from CNS to effector organs or to the periphery. Okay? As I have mentioned, yung neurons natin can be sensory or motor based on functional classification, no? When we say sensory nerves, these are nerves possessing only sensory fibers. So, for example, yung mga senses like sense of smell, yung vision, okay, auditory, okay. So, sensory nerves yon, okay. While motor nerves, those nerves composed only of fibers carrying impulses to the effectors, mostly skeletal muscle kasi motor, okay. And there are also mixed nerves. Okay, combination ng both sensory and motor. Okay, this is the nerve organization. So, tandaan nyo yung endoneurium, perineurium, and epineurium. So, endoneurium, ito yung siya yung nagko-coat ng axon natin. And then, multiple axons is further surrounded by your perineurium to form a nerve fascicle, and then groups of fascicle is further covered by a tough fibrous tissue termed as your epineurium. So ito yung nerve natin, no? Nerve, perineurium, and endoneurium. Okay. Yan. Endoneurium. Okay. And then forming fascicle surrounded by perineurium, and then groups of fascicle is further covered by a connective tissue termed as epineurium. Very easy lang, no? Next, ganglia. Ganglia are typically ovoid structures containing neuronal cell bodies and their surrounding glial satellite cells, supported by delicate connective tissue and surrounded by a denser capsule. So, they serve as relay stations to transmit nerve impulses. At least one nerve enters and another exits from each ganglion. Kumbaga sila yung, parang sa train ba, sila yung station. Okay? Magta-transmit sila. It's either one nerve papasok siya and then another one exit. It's either babalik siya sa brain mismo or mag-e-exit siya papuntang effectors. And the direction of nerve impulse determines whether the ganglion will be sensory or an autonomic ganglion. Okay, ano bang pinagkaiba ng sensory ganglia at saka autonomic ganglia? Sensory ganglia receive apparent impulses that go to the CNS. Okay? So, siya yung magre-receive kasi ng mga sensory information. For example, nakakita ka. So, yung vision mo yung vision mo, natatransmit yan. That's sensory information. So, sensory ganglia will receive that information and ipaprocess yun sa CNS. That's an example of your sensory ganglia. And this is again associated with both the cranial nerves, cranial ganglia, and the dorsal roots of the spinal nerve. So, pwedeng sense of yung pain, pwedeng temperature, pwedeng sense of touch. Okay, so those are sensory ganglia. They receive impulses na ipaprocess back to the brain. While your autonomic ganglia, okay, they affect the activity of smooth muscle, the secretion of some glands, heart rate, and many other involuntary activities. So, autonomic ganglia, so this is a separate system actually, no? Autonomic nervous system. So, lahat ng mga involuntary activities including that of the heart, sa peristalsis or sa smooth muscle contraction, okay, by which the body maintains a constant internal environment or termed as the homeostasis. Autonomic ganglia are small bulbous dilatations in autonomic nerves, usually with multipolar neurons. So, again, as I mentioned earlier, the autonomic nervous system, this has two parts. We have the sympathetic division and the parasympathetic division. When we say parasympathetic, remember actually itong table natin, no? So, sympathetic, usually, they arise from the thoracolumbar region, in contrast to your parasympathetic, which is your craniosacral region. And in sympathetic nervous system, the ganglia is close to the spinal cord in a chain. So, malapit lang siya sa spinal cord. And usually, they have long postganglionic fibers and with complex postganglionic branching. In contrast, your parasympathetic nervous system, usually the ganglia close to target organs. Okay, remember this one, ha? And they have short postganglionic fibers kasi nga, very close na sila sa target organs nila. So, short na lang yung ita-travel nila or short na lang yung distance ng nerve impulses kasi they are already close to your target organs and they have very little postganglionic branching. Again, as I have mentioned, autonomic ganglia or the autonomic nervous system, yung function niya is mainly the involuntary movements of the body such as your heart, yung mga glands natin, and your smooth muscle contraction. Okay. So, ito yon, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Again, sympathetic, very close yung ganglia nyo to the nervous system. In contrast to your parasympathetic, which is close to the target organs. So, ito yung mga effects ng autonomic nervous system. For the sympathetic, usually mydriasis, magdadilate yung pupil, reduce salivary flow, increase stroke volume and heart rate, vasoconstriction, reduced peristalsis and secretion, glycogen to glucose or glycogenolysis, inhibition of bladder contraction. Okay, while your parasympathetic is the opposite, no? Okay, decreased heart rate, bronchoconstriction, stimulates peristalsis. Remember actually na ito yung system na to ang tina-target ng some of our drugs kunwari sa cardiac, sa problem sa heart, sa mga hypertension for example, or sa mga may asthma. Okay, so regarding sa bronchoconstriction, bronchodilation, so yung tina-target dyan actually are the receptors, no, sa autonomic nervous system natin. Okay, mga alpha, beta 1, beta 2 receptors, etc. Okay. Okay, neural plasticity and regeneration. Neural plasticity and reformation of processes are controlled by several growth factors. So these are termed as neurotrophins. Remember that yung brain natin are di ba? These are tissues na hindi siya talaga nagre-regenerate. So just like the heart, yung mga stable tissues, no? Although yung peripheral nerve or yung peripheral nervous system has actually some degree of a better capacity of axonal regeneration. Okay? The onset of regeneration is signaled by changes in the pericardion or the cell body that characterize the process chromatolysis. So, ano nangyayari? The cell body swells slightly, the nasal substance is initially diminished, and the nucleus migrates to a peripheral position within the pericardion. Okay? Yan. The nucleus peripherally pumupunta sa peripheral. Okay? And then the more simply organized peripheral nerves have better, as I've mentioned, better capacity for axonal regeneration, a process involving the activation of pericardion, schwann cells, and macrophages. Yun, yung mga microglia natin, di ba? Nandun siya. So, ito yung process of neural plasticity and regeneration. So, I think this is my last slide. So, study the tables I have shown you. So, lalabas yan sa exam natin. Okay, thank you.